Africa's coalition government is split over the national budget as the ANC pushed through a fiscal framework, including the VAT increase, while the DA, favoring spending cuts and a rejection of higher taxes, opposed it. Now, the ANC secured the vote with support from smaller parties, while the DA is now challenging the process, sparking question about the future role in the coalition. Now, this conflict highlights deeper political rifts following the ANC's loss of its majority and also reflects broader debates over taxing and funding public services. External pressures like US-imposed tariffs worsen economic challenges and further complicate the coalition's stability in a fragile polity. Even though some African politicians, including Steenhuisen and Julius Malema, have criticized the budget plan. Now today I am joined by Ntsikelelo Breakfast. He's a political analyst in South Africa, and we will be joined by two other guests as the show progresses as well. But thank you so much for joining us at this time on The Conversation, Ntsikelelo.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's a pleasure. Now, in response to criticisms like John Steenhuisen's claim that the ANC is out of touch with the people, how do you justify the current fiscal policy?
Yeah, I think the challenge is that there have been different understandings and interpretations about the political arrangement of these political parties. We must bear in mind that there has never been a setup of this magnitude. So we have not had a legislative framework to guide, a coalition of this nature. So I think as time goes by, there needs to be a way of addressing conflicts, because having a conflict does not mean that the government must fall apart. But I think in this regard, the challenge has been the issue of value-added tax, because the DA, I think, it was punching above its weight because it wanted to put the budget on hold and bring other issues that have nothing to do with the budget through the back door, like, for instance, the land question, the Bella bill, and the NHI, to twist the ANC to give in to their demands. But unfortunately, it was a project gone wrong. I thought in the beginning I could see which way the wind is blowing, that the ANC, after it passed the budget with other political parties, it was going to let go of the DA, but I think there has been a turn of events.
I'm being told that we've been joined by Professor T.K. Pooe, public policy specialist in South Africa as well. Thank you so much for joining us, Professor Pooe.
Thanks for having me. Good evening.
Well, just before we go ahead with this interview, let's take a look at what some South African politicians, including John Steenhuisen and Julius Malema, had to say about this.
We will not support any form of increase on VAT. We agree that we need to protect SRD. We agree that we need to invest in infrastructure, but let's test the rich. Let the corporate tax be increased. Let there be tax on the wealthy people of South Africa who buy buffaloes for 22 million.
We need to grow the economy. That is the fundamental problem. 0.6% is not growth. That is regression. And unless we do the things that are going to focus on growth, simply taxing citizens and increasing the burden, ultimately a cumulative 1% on the citizens of the Republic of South Africa, is not the right thing to do unless you're leveling with them about exactly what it is you're going to do with explicit time frames to which they can hold us accountable.
Well, Professor Pooe, let's hear from you, your thoughts on this, especially when we know that, the DA actually voted against the fiscal framework when the tally even stood at 194 to 182. What does this narrow margin reveal about, the coalition stability?
I think the coalition is always, by its very nature, coalitions are bringing together, especially if you look at the history of South Africa, where there's been the dominance of the African National Congress. So it was always going to be something which is a bit rocky. But I think while people might focus on look whether it's going to last or not, it's a conversation that needs to be had. But I think it reveals two key things. One is there is no unified, I'd say, doctrine of what really makes this coalition work together with regards to moving South Africa forward. The DA, and I think the previous Professor Breakfast also touched on it, had their interpretation of what they wanted to use this budget or the fiscal framework to get an outcome which they feel that they lost when they first entered the coalition. The ANC still has not learned how to, not necessarily see power, but I think understand that, look, it's not a 50+1 party anymore. And what should be the unifier around this is a question of what is the common goal for South Africa? And I think what this coalition arrangement shows us, and this injuncture shows us, is there's nothing that really holds together for all parties in the Grand Coalition. It's every person for themselves. Everybody wants to get their media spot to say, listen, I'm doing the right thing. But if we have to really nail them down to say, listen, how do we really address the three key issues of South Africa, which is unemployment, institutional regress, and geographical, I'll say geographical inequality. And one might also add the fact that geopolitics is featuring in. And none of this really features in a great plan. So if you don't have this great plan that unifies to get the country to go forward, what you're going to have these trip-ups and these moments. And what I think these politicians seem to forget is time is against them. We're reaching the 1-year anniversary, meaning we've got 4 years left, and nothing has really been done in moving South Africa forward.
So, Ntsikelelo, you heard what he just said, that they're reaching, 1-year anniversary and nothing is really being done. And, speaking of this, you heard what John Steenhuisen actually said about, moving South Africa forward and the need to tax, the rich. Speaking of taxes, what prompted the DA's objection to a VAT increase of 0.5% this year and another year 0.5% next? Also, when such measures are actually defended as essential to fund public services like health and education?
My view is that this is a conflict of political ideologies, because the DA believes in marketization. They believe in growing the economy with the assumption that there will be a trickling down effect. But that model of development has not worked. There was a time when the economy grew, I think in the mid 2000 by 5%, but it was jobless growth. So that approach, it doesn't work. But my view is that in as much as people are taking a swipe at the ANC, and I'm not saying that they are on point, the issue is that money must come from somewhere. The DA has not provided a solution because on the one hand, they are vehemently opposed to value-added tax with the argument that it will affect the poorest of the poor and the middle class. But paradoxically, they are also vehemently opposed to corporate tax. So what exactly do they want? Money must come from somewhere. So I don't think that their approach has been sort of like helpful. But on the other hand, you have the ANC, which has been catering for the fact of the matter is, in South Africa, you have a divide between the haves and the have-nots. Therefore, there is no way we can have a democracy which flourishes if we are turning a blind eye to the poorest of the poor. And to provide for the poorest of the poor, we have to increase the fiscus, unfortunately. I think that was the rationale behind the VAT. I'm not saying that it was the best option.
All right, now let's hear from another guest, Sandile Swana, a political analyst in South Africa as well. Thank you so much for joining us, Sandile. Let's have your thoughts on this topic of discussion as well.
I suppose the discussion is about the VAT. The position on the VAT is that when this GNU was formed, a catalyst to the GNU was big business in South Africa, which said that there must be no tax increases during this term of office between now and between 2024 and 2029. So anybody who signed up into the GNU knew that. Secondly, to the extent that this debacle is linked to the VAT. The budget as a whole is about 2.6 trillion rand. The VAT, the 0.5%, it's about 13.5 billion, and the whole tax increase is about 28 billion. So it's about 1% of the budget. So any sensible person would be aware that sober people cannot be on a crisis on the basis of 1% of the budget. There is no such a thing. What is true, and secondly, let me add on the issue of the VAT that when we talk about alternative sources of revenue, tax revenue, we have undisputed tax debts. In other words, people who have submitted returns and the tax must be paid of about 400 billion. And the tax, our tax collection, our tax receiver is overperforming right now. And they've said they can collect 100 billion in this financial year to close that gap. And there are other ways that if the money came slowly, and the money will surely come, but if it came slowly, we have another 103 billion in the UIF, which can be given to the state as an interest-free loan. So that issue of the VAT is actually irrelevant. What is more relevant is the fact that the GDP growth rate and the supporting factors to a higher GDP growth rate need to kick in. And this budget is not a growth budget. There is nothing, a step-by-step process that shows us that the economy is going to grow if this budget is implemented. So to me, that is going to be the flashpoint of conflict as we go forward. The VAT is just a proxy. It's not the real deal.
Okay. Now, Professor Pooe, let's hear from you on what you feel about the DA's alignment with key opposition groups, you know, like MK and the EFF on certain issues.
Well, I think it's not by design. It just so happens that the issue at hand kind of coalesces them together. But even if you look at what, let's say, because I guess it's a very weird thing to say, because the DA is technically part of government, so you can't even say it's opposition. But let's say there's official opposition, which is MK, and then there's the EFF, and then the DA. But even in the arguments for what they're against, it comes out very differently. In the clip you played, Julius Malema makes the point about saying, listen, you should rather tax the rich and go in that direction. But what he then fails to understand is, look, South Africa, especially South Africa's middle class, is already highly indebted. And I think there were studies showing that over the last 5 years, South Africa has been losing a lot of its, one might say, its high earners. So it's a question of saying, listen, while they might be singing the same tune as the DA on this particular issue, the method and the means which they're going about doing it is actually quite different. And obviously, the MK's position is not really quite clear in terms of their issue is more to say, listen, it's going to affect the most downtrodden. I don't think it's really articulated it beyond there in terms of where revenue is going to come from. But I think all of them, I'd probably make the argument, including the DA, who partially have said this, sort of don't touch on the bigger issue at hand, which is, look, South Africa's issue is not so much that, yes, we're in debt. I think our debt to GDP to debt ratio is quite high. We've got, I think the issue of the debt we need to pay and the service on it, I think is 22% or something around that level. But it's the issue of, and this is maybe where it gets a bit tight, where all parties, including the ANC in Parliament, the issue of how we spend money in the country, the fact that there's been a creep in terms of how we spend money, and the fact that no one wants to have the conversation. Now, it's always easy to say, listen, let's cut social services. That's what I think the critique of the DA has always been, that they go for a soft target. What I think all these political parties, including the ANC, are missing is, where's the conversation about the architecture of government? Some of the studies one is looking at the moment, one of the areas where no one wants to touch on, because it really will touch on all their purses, is the issue that South Africa has a bloated system in terms of having a three-tier system. We've got local government, we've got provincial government, or in Nigeria it's called state government, and then obviously the federal, which is our national government. But in truth, if you look at how the constitution is constituted, and if you look at what provinces really give us, we really could do without provinces in this country. According to my calculation, over the last 5 years on a financial year end, we're looking at close to 500 billion which we spend on provinces. But provinces don't give services. The services come from local government and come from national government in part. When you speak about national, when you speak about health, when you're speaking about issues of education. So if they really were serious to say, listen, we want to go in the direction of growth, but we understand our problem is that we're spending too much money. The right place to start is, let's look at the architecture of government, which none of these political parties are looking at. And obviously there's the issue that we've got a heavy executive. I think in terms of what citizens would like to see, we'd like to see an executive which is cut down. But if we really were having leadership, the next course of action would be we need to cut down on our state or our provincial government, because really it's not giving us the services that we want. So if we look at it from that direction, not many of the parties that are speaking, the ANC all the way through as part of the DA, and including MK and the EFF, are really having this conversation. It's about really this VAT. So VAT really is, I think it's an important discussion because the average citizen will be impacted. But we're not having a conversation about where South Africa will be in the next 5 to 10 years. And if we needed to have that conversation, I think the dynamics change, and then we look at different things in the budget we need to cut down on.
All right. Now, let's hear from Ntsikelelo as well. You know, same question about the DA's alignment with opposition groups like the MK and the EFF on certain issues, because Professor Pooe did say that the issue should be or is majorly about how money is being spent, and they should be looking at or going in the direction of growth.
Yeah, I don't think that was a permanent alignment. I think the common denominator was the issue of budget, given the fact that all of them combined, they are vehemently opposed to value-added tax. But, you know, after this discourse is over, I think they will go separate ways. Because these political parties don't subscribe to the same ideological framework. The DA is more market-friendly. The EFF is to the left of the political spectrum. The same goes to MK of late. So the DA in the main, their central thesis has been the fact that we've got a budget deficit, meaning that we spend more than what we have, and therefore we have to settle the debt. No wonder they were saying that they are not going to support the budget. But also, in the bigger scheme of things, I mean, like I said, in the beginning, they wanted to take a strategic advantage of the current situation and, you know, introduce other things through the back door that have nothing to do with the budget and value-added tax. But it looks like the ANC and the DA are singing Kumbaya now. I think they've kissed and made up. I think they are going to still work side by side as well going forward.
All right, now Sandile, the DA actually claims, you know, that the budget vote was procedurally flawed. How do you reconcile the DA's claim that the proposed tax hikes would actually hit the poor hard with the government's argument for increased revenue in a country where we know that unemployment has actually exceeded 30%?
Yes, I think the side that opposes the budget is correct in pointing out that any type of tax increase, including the ones that are proposed in this budget, the VAT and the personal income tax increases, are going to diminish the buying power of the lower classes of society. There's no argument about that. Then what has happened is that the ANC said that there could be mitigation around that. So that issue is under debate, but the balance of the argument is that in actual fact, this step of increasing taxes is going to diminish the buying power of the lower classes. Now, all this debate that we are now having can be resolved, and the MK, one of the spokespersons of the MK party, Dr. Tandi, said that this issue wouldn't even be having this debate had the GDP growth rate been maintained. So there are mistakes that have diminished the GDP growth rate, and those mistakes have not yet been attended to, and they do need to be attended to. So the DA and the ANC, they can sit in the same room, but the arguments, and I mean, there are submissions, very detailed submissions about what must be done. For instance, the EFF is proposing a 512 billion stimulus package, which I think is a sensible proposal. that the economy now should not be concerned about trying to reduce debt in the conventional sense. We should be concerned with increasing investment so that the GDP growth rate can come out of the slump.
Hello, Sandile.
Yes, I'm here.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that. Now let's come back to you. Professor Pooe. Now, speaking of the DA's decision, to legally challenge the budget, that's the budget vote. That's legally. Does it signal a deeper ideological rift, with what is going on between the coalition?
Not necessarily. I think the key overriding issue would be I know the conversation of the day is the ANC is resetting or trying to reset the issue, but for the DA, they believed it was pertinent for them to be able to reset the level at which the Grand Coalition was working. You need to understand that many within the DA feel as though they lost entering into this coalition because the ANC dipped below 50, but if you look at the way the portfolios, especially strategic portfolios, have been dished out, the ANC still has the monopoly on key ministries such as the foreign affairs and a lot of the economic ministry. And a lot of the DA's core base and even its funders were beginning to complain to say, listen, you guys told us that if you had gone into government with the ANC, you were going to be able to change things. And they've been struggling for almost a year to be able to say, how do you get on top of this beast called government? So they've been trying to find a hill to which they can really fight towards. And the budget one was just the perfect one because it coalesced with what the country was feeling with regards to the issues of VAT. So I don't think it's an ideological thing necessarily. It's more of a preservation issue. Because as I think Professor Breakfast has touched on previously, the DA has been the party which historically would have no problems going with an increase in VAT, given that they'll say, listen, it's about stabilization. But the DA has picked out on a weakness within the ANC, namely that there's deep, unpopularity with the increase in VAT, when citizens say, listen, even if you increase VAT, because there was a National Treasury study, I think in 2014, 2015, when the then president, under his finance minister, Minister Gigaba, they increased VAT. Treasury found, much to their disappointment, that even if you increase VAT, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're increasing the revenue of the country, because South Africa's problems are structural. So the DA really, I think, found that this issue coalesced with what most citizens in South Africa wanted. It was not an ideological thing at all. It was simply an issue that they said, listen, we can actually complain about our status within this, within the Grand Coalition, kind of put a gun of sorts towards the ANC, try to renegotiate. But I think what they were not expecting was the reaction that the ANC has given, which the ANC has shown that, listen, we can't really do without you because we can simply go outside to get the votes. And now I think they're questioning themselves to say, listen, they've kind of put themselves in a bit of what we term a bit of a situation where the ANC has shown that they can go outside. So the key issue now, almost the boomerang comes back to the DA, where they need to be able to answer to their core constituency now to say, listen, are you really that important in this and what are you going to do? So I think they've kind of put themselves in a bit of a corner, but I think the ANC as well, their issues is not resolved, the fact that they can go outside the DA. They've seen that the markets can come back and have a voice, and there's also the key issue saying, if you're reconstituting what the Grand Coalition is going to look like and it's going to work on an ad hoc basis, how is that going to work when other votes come in? Because it's going to almost be the situation we find ourselves in local government here in South Africa, where smaller parties, maybe a one-seater party or two-seater parties, are going to have the ability to hold the ANC to ransom. And that's not exactly what many South African citizens want or the ANC wants. So it's not an ideological thing from the DA. They tried a situation which has not seemingly worked out for them. But I think for the ANC, they should not also be smiling to say, wow, we found a way out. Because going forward, this could also, I think it almost restrain what they want to do going forward.
Well, these issues did not just start, but, it got compounded, with so many issues that actually happened recently, like the expulsion of the ambassador, that's Ibrahim Rasool, and then the freezing of aids by the U.S., and then so many other things. Well, right now, Ntsikelelo, we would like for you to speak on the impact of, external pressures like the Trump administration's recent 30% tariffs on South African imports, on an already fragile economy.
Yeah, look, Trump has applied a blanket approach. Even his strategic allies have been dealt with a blow in a big way. I don't follow his line of thinking because, for instance, if you want to understand the foreign policy posture of the US, you need to understand the history of the US. Before the First World War, the US did not get involved in the affairs of Europe. That's why it had, an economy which was doing well, but it was the attack that was made by Germany on the ship of the US that made the US to get involved in the First World War, even in the Second World War, but then competed with the Soviet Union during the Cold War, and then got deeply involved in Europe. So I don't understand this, a withdrawal of the US now from the affairs of Europe and the way it is crossing swords with some of its strategic allies, because it's a blanket approach. It's not an approach which is limited to us as a country. But we have been dealt with a blow as well. But I don't think that, like China, we are in a position to push back, because that will escalate the magnitude of this conflict. I don't know what is the way out, but I think it is a compounding the situation between us and them, though.
Okay. Now, we'll take a quick break now. When we come back, we'll definitely love to hear the thoughts of Sandile and Professor Pooe on the 30% tariffs on South African imports as well. But we'll be with you in a bit. Stay with us. Welcome back, and thank you for staying with us on the conversation. If you're just joining us, we're discussing South Africa's coalition government being split over the national budget as the ANC has pushed through a fiscal framework including VAT increase, while the DA has rejected some of these taxes. And we've been speaking with Ntsikelelo Breakfast, Professor TK Pooe, and Sandile Swana. Thank you for staying with us, gentlemen. All right, so let me move to you, Sandile. Just before the break, we're talking about the pressure or the impact of external pressures, like the 30% tariffs on South African imports that the Trump administration has actually imposed. Let's hear your thoughts about it and, what you feel the impact is on the economy of South Africa.
Thank you. Yes, in the short term, there will be some impact, but you must remember that a lot of the exports from South Africa to the U.S., are driven by what you might even call foreign companies. We have Ford Motor Company, which is USA, which is an American company. You have Mercedes-Benz, you have Volkswagen. And in any case, those parties know, and they've been opening up new markets. So the largest trading bloc for South Africa is the European Union, and the European Union has shown signs of friendship to South Africa in the light of Make America Great movement of Donald Trump. The second bloc is China, a second trading bloc that we have, and the United States is third. There is no question that South Africans have to open other markets and deal with them, because our relationship with the United States is going to be tenuous and forcing us to negotiate on things we don't want to negotiate, including the two cases, one at the International Criminal Court against the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, in connection with war crimes and crimes against humanity, and Yoav Gallant, the former Minister of Defense. And the second case is the case of genocide at the International Court of Justice against the State of Israel. Those issues are non-negotiable from the South African perspective, and as far as I'm aware. So we have 600 American businesses here. Trump will have to decide what he wants to do about those businesses. But objectively, South Africa has got many markets that it needs to develop on an urgent basis and on a continuing basis in the light of a changing order, because these tariffs are about changing the world order, replacing or reforming in some way the WTO and the United Nations and other multilateral agencies.
Absolutely, Sandile. Now, Professor Pooe, in light of these international trade challenges, let's hear your thoughts, and also what alternative revenue models could be used to mitigate the burden on the nation's most vulnerable citizens.
Well, look, if we have to just put it into sheer numbers, the automotive industry in South Africa, I think, has been exporting $2 billion US. So to put a 30%, because tariffs are nothing but taxes basically on it, I think our Minister of Trade and Industry, Minister Parkstyle, basically said by virtue of putting this on, it actually makes a goer, the agreement that South Africa is part of, it actually makes it null and void. It basically means we're getting no benefit from it. But I think the key problem, especially if you look at the automotive industry in South Africa, especially in the home province of Professor Breakfast there, where already unemployment is rapid and there's already a lot of, basically, I'd say economic underdevelopment, it is really going to hit us hard. And while, look, it is true that we need to look for new markets as such, but in South Africa, we don't readily have those types of trade deals, because look, trade is a particular expertise. You don't simply create a trade deal overnight. That's why even if you look at the European Union's deal with Mercosur, which is in South America, it's taken over 10 to 20 years just to be able for them to say, listen, we've got an agreement, we're just now going to go through the contracts. If you look at the deal which the United Kingdom has been trying to get with the Republic of India post-Brexit, it takes a long time. You simply don't make trade deals overnight over the next 2 days or 3 days. So, because look, there's so much technicalities, it's economics, it's legal laws as such. So I think maybe the first point of call for the South African government, and I think for many of the governments in the region of SADC and also African countries, is an admission that, listen, this is going to hurt. It is going to hurt, and the type of hurt one is speaking about here is if the United States, as certain projections put it, if they continue in this way, it's going to be a recession for them. You can just imagine how damaging that's going to be for South Africa. But I probably want to spin it this way, because I think Trump is a bit of a highlight, because he's also showing us the structural weaknesses within the South African system, especially the economic design of it. I'll go back to government architecture. I'll also go back to certain industries that South Africa has not really been looking after. For instance, the reason why the Chinese have been able to fight back with some of their tariffs, as I think as of today it's going towards 84%, that's the tariff they're putting on the United States, is they knew in Trump's first term that they needed to change a few things. They needed to boost domestic spend. South Africa is quite the opposite. Our domestic spend is quite poor. So the only logical thing, and logical here, I'm speaking about the next 10 years, because that's a proper assessment of how you can look at trade, is South Africa needs to be looking towards the region of SADC. Because that's South Africa's future. Our future economy, if we're going to say saving South Africa's economy, is based on this regional thing. But what we should be doing in the short term is to be able to say, listen, what can we do internally that really says we're cutting out waste, and one of the key areas of our wastage is local government. Our government has been pathetic at making sure that local government works, and making sure that we professionalize local government, making sure we get the right people in there, and then looking at issues such as profits, as I've mentioned. And then, yes, you need to review all our trading partners, because in as much as we could maybe even make a deal with the European Union is not going to be our friend. They're not friendly at all. If anything, one of the key critiques we've been making here at the Wits School of Government about the European Union is they want us to get into energy agreements which benefit them but don't benefit us. They want us to turn off our coal so that we can go buy their product. So this is not a friendship thing. And maybe what President Trump is showing us that we need to be, as Africans and as South Africans, a bit more cunning about what deals that we sign. Trade is not about friendship. Trade is about getting a deal out of it. And I think what President Trump has shown us, especially the South African government, as it relates to the United States, even the European Union, even the Chinese, is we need to be more cunning. We need to be more future-orientated. And the reason primarily we're in this mess is because we have not been looking after our economy. So I think that's a positive from Trump. But if you would say, getting back directly to your question, how do you look at it? The only way you can really look at it and not even rectify it, but prepare yourself, is to look at domestic reform. If you don't do domestic reform, you're going to be at the back end what President Trump is doing. And unfortunately, we've neglected that to our detriment.
Well, while you talk about, looking at domestic reforms, Ntsikelelo, questions are looming over whether the DA should remain in the government of national unity. What are the likely scenarios if the party decides to withdraw?
I don't think that the DA is going to walk out of the GNU by itself. I also don't think that the ANC will let go of the DA. You see, it must be borne in mind that the GNU is not a brainchild of the ANC or the DA. The DA at some point said that they don't want to work with the ANC. In the same way, the ANC has always viewed the DA to be to the right of the political spectrum. But I think there was an intervention of the market forces. Remember, the DA had a program of Moonshot Pact, and then they had another program of multi-party charter, but then failed to garner enough votes, then reached out to the ANC because of this facilitation of the market forces. So it was quite interesting what had happened over the weekend before the ANC met. You know, there was a media coverage regarding the involvement of business to say that these political parties, no matter what, they have to work side by side. And the DA has had a change of heart. They've sort of like changed gear. They are more humble now. I think they are going to kiss and make up and work side by side. So I think that is going to be the, they might maybe chop and change this and that, but I don't think that they will go separate ways. They will work, because if the DA walks out of the GNU, it will create a scope for the EFF or MK to start talking to the ANC as to how they can work. Because the political parties that have voted for the budget by themselves, I don't think they'll be able to constitute a government. So there will be a shortfall. So to make up for that shortfall, then the ANC will be forced to work with the MK and the EFF. And the DA doesn't want that, because if that happens, then there will be too much gravitation to the left. I think they are vehemently opposed to leftist policies.
Okay. Sandile, do you think that, you know, the DA and the ANC will kiss and make up? Is there an exit strategy for the coalition that if legal challenges and internal dissent continues to intensify?
The differences are going to continue to be hectic between the DA and other parties, for that matter. So what is likely to happen from the side of the ANC? It may say to the DA, let's do a cabinet reshuffle, because there are certain areas where the DA has shown reluctance to implement, in any case, the policies that the ANC supports very strongly. So there may be, and then if you're asking me who else can come in, there are two candidates, which is Action SA and the BOSA, and both of those are former members, are former leaders of the DA themselves, by the way. And Mashaba is a very successful businessman. He's got a very credible CV, and Musimaimane was a national leader of the DA before, so he can be part of parliament of the GNU without a problem. So I think there are problems, very deep political problems outside of the budget that the DA is pursuing, which seek to align South Africa with the Make America Great Again, which also in some ways give the right wing in South Africa a lot of room, the racist apartheid proponents in South Africa, a lot of room to maneuver. So there are sensitivities around that as well, over and above the technical issues of the budget. So there is scope for the ANC to reshuffle the cabinet.
Okay. Professor Pooe, let's hear from you. What are the likely scenarios if, you know, the DA decides to withdraw, and what would it mean for policy continuity?
Well, I think in terms of policy continuity, I think there's been none thus far. If anything, we have yet to actually get to substantive policy within the post-elections period of South Africa. Look, the first scenario, as you say, if we're speaking of a scenario of the DA leaving, is Then there's a key question of where does the ANC get the shortfall of the numbers? Now, if we were to go with what's just happened recently at the budget, which is, as I said, you get the parties with either one individual or two parties. Here we're speaking about the party of Mr. Maimani, the party of Mr. Songezo Zibi and the like. I think at most it pushes them towards 202. So it's still a very slim margin for what the ANC can really do. Because remember, now that we are in this period of coalitions, it means that a lot of the issues that are going to come up within Parliament are going to have to go to a vote. So if the ANC goes in this direction, they're simply going to be using a model of supply and confidence, which is to say, every party they're going to look at the issues, I think, on a case-to-case basis. They're going to say, in the same way they did with this budget vote or the fiscal issue, they're going to say, listen, on this issue, this is what we believe. Who wants to come around us on this? But what many I think are looking at within this scenario is to say, look, the only carrot that can give these parties with only one or two members would be the issue of, listen, the DA vacates a lot of ministerial positions and they get given to those parties. But that creates a whole new dynamic altogether, which is to say, you're basically saying, in your first year when you've basically done nothing, you are going to now ask for another grace period. So the people that are coming in can also have a grace period. So now we're looking at 2 years. So, and this situation kind of puts the ANC at a bit of a back foot, because these parties at any given moment in time can say, you know what, the ANC, we're not happy with this. And because you really now don't have a solid majority with the backing of the DA, a lot of the issues which you want as the ANC, we can simply now say, no, listen, you're going to have to go to the EFF and the MK. And I don't think in the ANC in its current form is ready to have discussions with the EFF and the MK, given that we also have to remember the ANC has got what I term as the ANC curse of the second incumbency, which is to say we've yet to have a president in South Africa from the ANC who's seen through the second term. So it's not so looking at it, the DA, while they might want to leave, I think they're also going to be a bit hamstrung to say, is it really wise to leave? And then have to go to your voters and say, listen, we tried our best, and your voters are going to say, but you didn't really do anything. You seem to be going along well with the ANC. You gave the ANC the ability to finish off their last, their last official policies like the land expropriation and the NHI. So if we're just using the scenario of the DA leaving, I don't think it makes the room any smoother for the ANC. If anything, it makes it more complicated. Because the truth be told, the DA has been quite a compliant partner in this relationship. They've given the ANC most of what they want. It's only in this term that they've really come up with a headache for the ANC, and it's something which the ANC has shown that they can really get around. So I'm not too sure it actually helps the ANC or the DA if the DA exists.
Okay. Ntsikelelo, just before we wrap up, would like to have your final thoughts, especially with voices warning that the optics do not look good. So what would you advise the GNU, to do, what measures can they take in order to maintain stability within their ranks?
Well, where there are human beings, there are always problems. Conflict is natural. I think they need to attack problems hard and be soft on each other, and put the country first. I don't know how they are going to address the differences that they have on the international front, because they don't speak the same language. The DA gravitates to the West, the ANC gravitates to the East, and has historical ties with what they call progressives. So yeah, the issue of foreign policy, I think, is going to be one area that they disagree about. But on other, look, there are no coalition arrangements which are perfect on a global scale. From time to time, everywhere there are moments of madness. So I don't think that we must be too hard on ourselves as a country. But at the same time, I think we need to avoid things that are basically unnecessary, that can pose a threat to the country.
Okay. Now let's have your final words, Sandile.
Yes, I think that South Africa is a nation with two nations in it that at this juncture, these nations are somewhat incompatible. The DA represents the privileged white class in South Africa, which is aligned with hostile interests of the West, especially the Make America Great movement, which our expelled ambassador Ibrahim Rasool pointed out that it has got a very strong white supremacist aspect to it. And that becomes totally incompatible with what the ANC and the traditional parties of the black majority would like to see in South Africa, and the DA is implicated in that. So to me, the ANC has no alternative but to actually reduce the representation of the DA in the cabinet one way or the other. Otherwise, this country is going to be sold out to foreign imperialist interests.
Okay, let's have your final thoughts as well, Professor Pooe.
Well, thank you for having me and having us this evening. Look, I think the key issue would be, as I've always said this, if they don't have to like each other. Very few people professionally like each other. But I think the key issue has always been with the coalition is they need to pick three things which improve the Republic of South Africa. And I'll keep on saying it really revolves around the economy. And if they can really just have an agreement about that, yes, there'll be ideological differences between how you get there, but the key issue should be surely improving local government is not a political issue. Makes a South Africa better issue. Surely trying to get, get agreements that really bring in foreign direct investment into the country. Speak to these countries or these companies which are a bit in the middle about whether they should stay in China or go back to the United States. Really be the home of, a proper neutral, not neutral in the sense that politically, but neutral economically, to say, listen, we're open to all businesses, Chinese or American. And I think this is what the coalition should have started with, to say, listen, it's not about that we have to like each other. It's not even about our parties doing very well. It's about the issue that if the economy does well, we all do well. And I think the third anchor to this would be, how do we open up the regional economy such that we really make sure that going in the next 10 years, because our problems are not a tomorrow or a year issue, our issues are in the next 10 years. How do we make sure that the regional SADC really does become an economic hub for the future of the world? Because I think we've got that potential in Southern Africa and also across the African continent to do that. If they can call us around these three things, they don't have to like each other, they just have to work towards it.
All right. Well, thank you so much, gentlemen, for your thoughts on this issue. I would like to thank Ntsikelelo Breakfast, political analyst based in Nelson Mandela University in South Africa. And I would also like to thank Professor T.K. Pooe, public policy specialist, Wits School of Governance, Pretoria, South Africa, and Sandile Swana, political analyst in Gauteng, South Africa. Appreciate you for your time. And that's it on today's show. That's today's episode of The Conversation. Do not forget, you can catch up on all missed episodes on our YouTube channel at News Central TV. You can also watch News Central live on DSTV channel 422, Go TV channel 23, Star Times channel 274, Avo TV, and YouTube. Until I come your way again, I am Darshan Usman. Goodbye.